He was only 11 years old and completely blind. Most kids his age ended their nights with cartoons, homework, or soft lamplights spilling across their bedroom walls. But for him, the world was different, darker, quieter, smaller. Except for one voice. Every night at exactly 11:30 p.m., he would sit on the edge of his bed, fingers gently tracing the shape of his small radio, waiting, counting the seconds, until he finally heard it. This is The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. And the boy would smile, the kind of smile that only someone who truly listens can understand. He didn't know what Johnny Carson looked like. He didn't know what the audience wore, how the lights shined, or how Johnny moved on stage. But he felt the show in a way sighted people never could. When Johnny told a joke, the boy imagined explosions of color. When the audience laughed, he pictured waves of light rolling across a vast ocean. And when Carson paused, he understood the meaning behind the silence. Night after night, he found comfort in Johnny's laughter, warmth in his tone, and hope in his stories. The world outside might have been dark, but inside that small room, through that small radio, he saw everything. Every single night. No excuses. No missed shows. For 2 years straight. It wasn't just entertainment for him. Johnny Carson had become his window, his guide, his friend. His parents often peeked through the door to check on him. They would see him sitting perfectly still, head tilted slightly, attention locked on every word. Sometimes he'd laugh softly. Sometimes he'd whisper responses as if Johnny could hear him. He had never seen Johnny Carson, but he knew him better than most people who had. And one night, after 2 years of listening, imagining, and wishing, the boy's heart beat differently. A thought grew inside him, something brave, something impossible, something he never shared with anyone before. That night, he quietly said to himself, "I want to ask Johnny Carson for just one thing." But he had no idea that the moment he decided that, his entire life was about to change. For most people, a nightly routine is simple: brush teeth, dim the lights, lie down, sleep. But for the blind boy, nights were sacred. Nights were the only time the world finally made sense. And the reason was always the same. Johnny Carson, every evening, after finishing dinner with his parents, he would quietly slip away to his room. He would run his hand across the wall until he reached the corner where his old radio sat, scuffed, dusty, and a little cracked from years of use. But to him, it was priceless. It was the only window he had into a world he could never see. He would sit cross-legged on the floor, adjusting the antenna by sound, not sight. A slight buzz, a sharp crackle, then the warm hum of a signal connecting. And then, his favorite part, Johnny's voice filling the room like soft sunlight spreading across a dark landscape. For 2 years, he didn't miss a single show. Not one. Even when he was sick, even on nights he felt tired enough to collapse, even on the night his father lost his job and the house felt heavy with anxiety, he tuned in. Johnny made him forget his struggles. Other kids had posters. He had a voice. He memorized every segment, every musical note, every audience cheer. Sometimes he could predict Johnny's jokes before he even said them. Sometimes he clapped along with the audience, imagining himself sitting right there in the studio. But as the months passed, something deeper began to grow inside him. Johnny wasn't just a host to him anymore. He had become, without ever meeting him, a teacher of confidence, humor, and hope. He listened closely to how Johnny handled guests. The pauses, the reactions, the kindness hidden behind sarcasm, the intelligence masked behind jokes. And the boy learned from all of it. His mother once asked him gently, "Beta, what do you imagine when Johnny speaks?" He smiled and whispered, "I imagine the world." Because when you cannot see, the imagination becomes your eyes. And his world, shaped by Johnny Carson's voice, had become vast, bigger than darkness, bigger than fear, bigger than limitation. Every night, before the show began, he would run his fingertips over a growing stack of notebooks beside his bed, filled with scribbles, lines, and dots only he understood. Notes about Johnny's monologues. Descriptions of how he imagined Johnny looked. Drawings made not with vision, but with intuition. He had mapped out a full image of Johnny in his mind. Tall, warm smile, sharp suit, gentle eyes. He had never seen Johnny Carson, but in his heart, he had. 2 full years passed like this. Quiet nights, glowing imagination, and a voice that meant something more than entertainment. But deep inside, A quiet longing began turning into a question. Why did Johnny's voice matter so much? Why did he feel connected to someone he had never met? Why did listening every night feel like a lifeline? The boy didn't have all the answers, but he had one feeling, a growing desire. A desire to reach out, to let Johnny know what he meant to him, to share something he had never told anyone. One winter evening, after another night of laughter echoing from the radio, he gently placed his hand on the device and whispered, "I wish he knew how much he helped me." His mother overheard. She walked in softly, sat beside him, and held his hand. "Then tell him," she said. He hesitated. How could a little blind boy matter to someone like Johnny Carson, one of the most famous television hosts in the world? But his mother's voice was steady. "Just speak from your heart." So he did. He spent the next 3 nights writing a letter. Slowly, carefully, every word chosen with emotion, not sight. He wrote about losing his vision, about loneliness, about the darkness that felt endless, and most importantly, about how listening to Johnny Carson every night made him feel alive again. But he didn't stop there. At the end of the letter, he added something he never thought he would write. A small, brave request. A request he wasn't sure would ever be read. A request he dreamed of, but feared was too big for someone like him. When he sealed the envelope, his hands trembled. It felt like he was sending a piece of his soul out into the world. He held it tightly and whispered, "Please reach him." His mother hugged him, kissed his forehead, and said, "You never know, Beta. Sometimes, miracles begin with a letter." He dropped it into the mailbox the next morning, and as it slipped from his fingertips, something inside him shifted. For the first time in a long time, he felt hope. Which city or country are you watching this story from right now? Be sure to comment. Days passed, then a week, then 2. Every morning, the blind boy quietly asked his mother, "Did anything come in the mail today?" And every day, the answer was the same. "Not yet, Beta." He tried not to feel disappointed. After all, he knew the truth. Johnny Carson received thousands of letters. People from all over the country wrote to him. Celebrities, fans, comedians, dreamers. Why would his letter matter? But still, every night, he sat in front of his radio, waiting for Johnny's voice. And every night, as he listened, his imagination drifted toward that single thought. Did my letter reach him? Even though he tried to hide it, his mother could sense the tension in his voice. His father noticed it too. He spoke softly one evening. "Son, even if Johnny never reads it, your courage matters. You told your story. That's not small." The boy nodded, but inside, doubt pulled at him like a long shadow stretching across his chest. One night, as Johnny performed his monologue, the blind boy held the radio closer than ever. He tried to hear something special, something different, maybe a sign that Johnny had read his letter. But everything was normal. The audience laughed. Johnny joked. The show flowed effortlessly, and the boy felt small again. The next morning, he did something he had never done before. He sat down with a fresh sheet of paper. He began writing a second letter. But this one didn't come easily. He struggled. He doubted himself. He tore up page after page. How do you ask someone to hear your voice when they don't even know who you are? He whispered this to himself again and again. At one point, he put his head on the table and let a few tears escape. He wasn't crying because Johnny hadn't replied. He was crying because he feared his request might have been wrong, or foolish, or too big for someone like him. After all, he was just a blind kid in a small town. Who was he to ask anything from a star like Johnny Carson? His mother sat beside him, placed a gentle hand on his back, and said, "You're not asking for money. You're not asking for fame. You're asking to be heard. That is never wrong." Her words were warm, but his heart still trembled. Later that night, as he listened to The Tonight Show again, he heard something unexpected. Johnny was telling a story about a fan letter. Funny, lighthearted, but it struck the boy deeply. Johnny said, "Sometimes, one small letter can change your whole week. You never know who's writing to you." The boy's breath caught. Was Johnny talking about him? Did he read it? Did he know? But then Johnny moved on to the next joke, and the boy tried not to read too much into it. Still, something in his chest sparked again. Hope. Real hope. He picked up the torn pieces of his failed letters, collected them into a small pile, and whispered, "I won't give up." As the days passed, he tried to stay patient. But inside, the struggle grew heavier. He kept checking the mailbox. He kept asking his mother. He kept imagining what would happen if Johnny actually responded. Would he call? Would he send a letter? Would he even care? Every night, he listened to Johnny's voice with new intensity. He wasn't just a fan anymore. He was waiting for a miracle. And then, something strange began happening. He started dreaming of standing on a stage, dreaming of hearing Johnny speak directly to him, dreaming of the moment when Johnny would say, "I'm glad you wrote to me." These dreams were so vivid, so real, that when he woke up, his heart ached. Because deep down, the fear still lived. What if he never gets my letter? What if he does, and it doesn't matter? What if I'm asking too much? The struggle wasn't just about waiting for Johnny's reply. It was about fighting the belief that his voice didn't matter. One night, after a particularly emotional episode of The Tonight Show, one where Johnny shared a sentimental moment with his guest, the boy felt something inside him break open. He placed both hands on his radio and said softly, "Johnny, if you ever hear my letter, please just talk to me once. Not for fame, not for attention, just once. Just to hear the voice that had become his world, speaking directly to him. Have you ever sent someone a message from the heart, but didn't get a reply? Be sure to share in the comments." The letter reached NBC on a quiet Monday morning. It didn't look special. No fancy envelope. No bold handwriting. Just a simple white envelope with slightly uneven writing. Letters shaped by a child who couldn't see what he had written. It slid into a large gray bin along with hundreds of other fan letters addressed to The Tonight Show. Most of these letters would never make it past the interns. But fate has its own way of moving things. An NBC staff member named Linda was sorting mail that day. She wasn't a producer. She wasn't a decision maker. She was just the kind of person who noticed details others ignored. As she skimmed through the pile, one envelope caught her attention, not because of how it looked, but because of how it felt. The paper had faint pressure marks, indentations, like the writer had pressed harder than usual. She opened it gently. Inside was a letter written slowly, carefully, every word spaced, as if the writer was afraid to make a mistake. As she began reading, her eyes softened. "My name is Daniel. I'm 11 years old. I am blind. I listen to your show every night because your voice helps me see the world." Her breath caught. She kept reading, her heart tightening with every sentence. "Sometimes I feel alone, but when your show comes on, I don't feel alone anymore." She read about the boy's imagination, how he pictured the audience laughing, how he imagined Johnny's expressions, how he repeated the jokes quietly to himself so he could feel included in a world he could not see. Then she reached the last lines. Simple, soft, so innocent, it made her hands tremble as she held the paper. "If it's not too much, I just want to hear your voice in person once. Only once. It would mean everything to me." Linda didn't move for a long moment. She looked around at the busy office, producers rushing, assistants answering phones, papers shuffling, laughter echoing from down the hall. So much noise, so much activity. And yet here was a letter from a boy sitting in complete darkness, asking only to hear a voice. She swallowed hard, stood up, and walked straight to the executive floor. The first reaction. The first producer, she showed the letter to, skimmed it, and said, "Sweet, but Carson gets emotional letters all the time." Another producer shrugged. "Touching, but we can't feature every fan request." But Linda didn't give up. She walked into the head writer's office. Not a place interns usually entered without knocking. He looked up. "What's this?" She placed the letter on his desk silently. He began reading, slowly at first, then faster, then softer, until he finally put the paper down and rubbed his eyes. This is different," he whispered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Because they both felt it, this wasn't just a letter. It was a story, a human story, a story that needed to reach the one man it was written for. The head writer stood abruptly and said, "I'm taking this to Johnny." Linda blinked. "To Johnny Carson? Right now?" He nodded, already walking toward Johnny's dressing room. Johnny Carson reads the letter. Johnny Carson was preparing for that night's show, flipping through cue cards, rehearsing lines, adjusting his suit jacket, when the head writer knocked and walked in. "Johnny, you need to read this." Carson took the letter casually at first. He was used to fan mail being passed to him occasionally. But as he began reading, something in his face shifted. His usual calm expression softened. His eyes slowed. His posture changed. When he reached the line, "Your voice helps me see the world." He inhaled deeply, and for a moment, he didn't speak. Then he kept reading. The boy's dreams. His loneliness. His imagination. his nightly routine. And finally, the last line. I just want to hear your voice in person once. Johnny stared at the paper. The room felt suddenly still. Finally, he said quietly, "Get this boy's phone number." "But we don't have it," the head writer replied. "Then find him," Johnny said firmly. "I don't care how long it takes. We're bringing him here." The head writer nodded, moved by the rare emotion in Carson's voice. Johnny read the letter again, slower, more deeply. "This kid listens to me every night," he said softly. "Every single night, for 2 years." He looked up. "We're going to make this happen." Meanwhile, the blind boy waits. At home, the boy sat with his radio, hugging it close. The struggle inside him was still strong. No letter. No reply. No sign of hope. But that night, for the first time in 2 years, Johnny Carson sounded different. Warmer. More reflective. More emotional. Almost as if he was speaking to someone specific. But the boy didn't know, couldn't know, that while he sat in his dark, quiet room imagining Johnny Carson's world, Johnny Carson was now imagining his. The day finally arrived. The blind boy had no idea what to expect. No idea what would happen. No idea if his dream would be real or just another whisper in the darkness. All he knew was this. Tonight, after 2 long years of listening, imagining, and hoping, he would finally meet the voice that had changed his life. His mother held his hand as they drove to the studio. "Beta, remember," she whispered, "it's okay to just be yourself. That's all he needs." He nodded. He had prepared. He had imagined every possible moment. But nothing could truly prepare him for reality. The studio was enormous. The lights were bright. The hum of cameras and crew filled the air. Everything felt bigger than he had imagined. Louder, brighter, overwhelming. And yet, he stayed calm. His heart beat fast, but he breathed slowly, focusing on what mattered most, Johnny's voice. Then, in the chaos of a live studio, he heard it. "Hello there," Johnny Carson said gently, approaching him. It was the same voice he had heard every night for 2 years. But now it was real, standing in front of him. Alive. The boy's hands trembled as he reached forward. He didn't know where to look. He didn't need to. He could feel Johnny's presence, his warmth, his calm energy. And for the first time, he felt a wave of courage rise inside him. Because now, finally, he could ask. He took a deep breath. And he spoke, slowly, carefully, from the very depths of his heart. "Mr. Carson, I don't want money. I don't want gifts. I don't want anything. I want to hear your voice in person once." The words hung in the air like fragile glass. Johnny paused. He didn't laugh. He didn't make a joke. He didn't deflect. He simply listened. He absorbed the courage behind those words. He felt the longing that had carried a small blind boy through 2 years of darkness. And he felt honored. The studio fell silent. Crew members stopped what they were doing. Cameras rolled, but nobody moved. Even the audience, who had been waiting to see a television moment, sensed the weight of this request. Johnny knelt slightly to be closer to the boy's level. "Just once?" he asked softly. "Yes, sir," the boy replied, voice quivering but steady. I just want to hear you talk, just for a moment, just to know I'm not alone when I listen to the show." Johnny's eyes glistened. For the first time in years on television, he was completely still. He took the boy's hands gently into his own. "You've been listening to me all this time?" he asked quietly. "Yes, sir. Every night for 2 years. I never missed a single show." Johnny nodded slowly, the weight of that devotion settling in. Then, with a warm smile, he said, "Then let's make sure you hear it properly. Close your eyes and listen, because tonight, I'm talking just to you." And he did. For several long, precious minutes, Johnny Carson spoke directly to the boy. He told stories. He made soft jokes. He described the set, the audience, the way the lights glimmered across the studio. He made the boy see without sight, hear with feeling, and feel with imagination. The boy laughed. He cried. He leaned forward, soaking in every word, every pause, every inflection, every tiny nuance of the voice he had memorized, loved, and lived with for so long. For 2 years, he had imagined this. For 2 years, he had waited. And now it was real. Johnny finally stopped, letting the moment linger. The boy's face, though unseen, radiated joy. His lips curled into a smile that could have lit the darkest night. And in that smile, Johnny Carson saw something he hadn't seen in decades of television. Pure, unfiltered gratitude. "Thank you, sir," the boy whispered. "No," Johnny said softly. "Thank you. You've reminded me why I do this. You've reminded me what it means to connect with people." And with that, the moment passed, but it would stay in their hearts forever. The audience, once silent, erupted in applause. Crew members wiped tears from their eyes. But the boy didn't look at them. He didn't care. He had heard the one voice that had carried him through years of darkness, and that was enough. If it were you, what would be your first request upon meeting Johnny Carson? Write it in the comments. The moment had passed, but the impact lingered. The blind boy sat quietly, still holding the warmth of Johnny Carson's voice in his ears. He could feel the energy of the studio around him, the crew, the cameras, the audience, but all he cared about was the sound, the feeling, the memory of a voice that had been with him every night for 2 years. Johnny Carson smiled, kneeling to the boy's level once more. "You've given me a gift tonight," he said softly. "You reminded me why I do this show. Not for fame, not for applause, not for awards, but for moments exactly like this." The boy's hands squeezed Johnny's gently. "I never thought someone like me could be heard," he whispered. Johnny shook his head. Not only heard, my friend, but understood. At that moment, NBC staff realized something extraordinary. They had witnessed not just a television moment, but a human story that would touch hearts worldwide. The story didn't stay behind the studio doors for long. NBC acts fast. The producers quickly called a meeting. "This has to go on air," one of them said. "People need to hear this. It's bigger than a show. It's bigger than entertainment. It's humanity." They edited footage carefully. Every word Johnny spoke to the boy was preserved. Every reaction, the boy's laughter, his tears, his small sighs of wonder, was included. And when it aired, millions of viewers saw something remarkable. A blind boy, devoted for 2 years, finally meeting the man who had inspired him. Within hours, the story exploded. Emails poured in. Letters. Phone calls. People everywhere were touched, not just by Johnny Carson, but by the courage, patience, and hope of a small blind boy. Viewers wrote, "This made me cry. What a beautiful story. If only we all listened like Johnny and cared like this boy." Hope and kindness really do exist. Social media buzzed, though in the early 1980s, it was not Twitter or Facebook. Still, the story spread through newspapers, magazines, and word of mouth. Television shows replayed clips. Talk shows praised Carson's humility. Human interest segments featured the boy's courage and patience. The boy became a symbol, not because he was famous, but because his story reminded the world of the power of perseverance, hope, and kindness. Johnny Carson, usually reserved about personal stories, spoke about it later. "I've met thousands of people, read thousands of letters, but this one stayed with me. It reminded me that the smallest voices can hold the greatest strength." And the boy, still blind, still quiet, but now profoundly changed, walked out of the studio with his mother, a smile brighter than any he had ever imagined. He had not asked for fame. He had not asked for gifts. He had asked for one simple thing, to be heard. And in return, the world had listened. People everywhere learned a lesson that couldn't be taught in school. You don't need to see to feel. You don't need power to inspire. You don't need recognition to touch the world. Millions felt moved. Millions were inspired. Letters and calls poured into NBC from people sharing their own stories of hope, courage, and small miracles. The blind boy's story became a symbol of patience, humility, and the extraordinary power of listening. If you were in this boy's place, what would be the first thing you would say to Johnny Carson? Write it in the comments. Do you also want to positively impact someone's life this much? Type hope if you believe in small miracles. That night, the boy lay in bed, holding his radio close. He listened to recordings of the episode over and over, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to savor the moment. 2 years of devotion had finally led to something bigger than he imagined. Not just a personal dream fulfilled, but a story that inspired millions. Johnny Carson's voice, once a distant companion, had become real. And with that, the boy understood something crucial. Even the smallest act of courage can echo across the world. NBC's airing didn't just broadcast the story. It amplified a universal truth. Patience, hope, and courage will always find their way. The episode aired, and the world watched. Millions of people, children, parents, fans, and strangers, saw the blind boy finally meet the man whose voice had carried him through 2 long years. It wasn't just television. It wasn't just a story. It was a moment that touched hearts across the globe. People wrote letters. Newspapers highlighted the story. Radio stations talked about it. Even other celebrities shared how inspired they were by the boy's courage and Johnny's kindness. The boy, who had spent nights imagining this moment, suddenly realized something incredible. His small request, so simple, so pure, had created ripples far beyond his room, his city, or even his country. People were moved, inspired, and reminded of the power of patience, hope, and human connection. The blind boy's new world. He didn't become famous. He didn't seek attention. He just got something far more meaningful: recognition, dignity, and the knowledge that one small voice could truly matter. He returned home, still holding the memory of Johnny Carson's voice. But now, it wasn't just a voice on a radio. It was a reminder that courage, persistence, and sincerity can create miracles. Every night afterward, when he listened to Johnny's show, he smiled differently. He knew dreams can come true, even for the quietest, smallest voices in the world. The world responds. Viewers everywhere shared the story with friends, families, and colleagues. It reminded me to be kind, one wrote. Sometimes, listening is more important than speaking, said another. Millions felt inspired to act with patience, empathy, and understanding, just like the blind boy. Johnny Carson himself would later call it one of the most meaningful moments of my career. It was not about the show, the audience, or the ratings. It was about humanity. And for a blind boy, 2 years of listening had finally been heard. Final lessons for the audience. This story became a timeless reminder. Even a small act of courage can create a lasting impact. Patience, hope, and sincerity are more powerful than fame or fortune. Listening deeply to others is a gift few understand, but it can change lives. And now it's your turn. If you believe no one should be ignored, type hard in the comments. Tag someone whose voice matters to you and remind them they are heard. Subscribe for more inspirational stories that restore your faith in humanity. Because just like the blind boy and Johnny Carson, your voice, your courage, and your kindness can ripple far beyond what you imagine. And sometimes, just sometimes, miracles happen to those who never stop listening.